Madam Prime Minister, you have been an outstanding leader, not just for your country, but for our alliance, with a clear vision, clear words and clear actions. Let me mention just 3 examples under your leadership. Estonia is spending 2.89% of its GDP on defense. Estonia leads the world in terms of bilateral government support to Ukraine as a share of GDP 3.6%. And you have pushed concrete commitments in support of Ukraine, including with your initiative on 155mm ammunition and setting a minimum of military support at 0.25% of GDP for the next 4 years. Prime Minister, our Standing Committee discussed its recommendation for the Washington Summit, as well as our support for Ukraine. Today also we will hear from the Chairman of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, Rasom Stefanchuk, and from our colleague Yehor Cherniev, who is here with us. Welcome, Yehor. Our Assembly believes that as it celebrates its 75th anniversary, NATO must affirm that is an alliance of democracies, firmly grounded in our shared values with a democratic resilience center at NATO's headquarters. An alliance determined to defend every inch of Allied territory at all times under Article 5 against state threats and as well as against terrorism. An alliance committed to standing with Ukraine until victory. An alliance which fairly shares the benefits, burdens, and responsibilities for our security. Prime Minister, we look forward to hearing about your vision and Estonia's priorities for NATO and for Ukraine. Madam Prime Minister, the floor is yours.
Good morning, and so happy to see so many of you Sunday morning so early. I was like, 9 o'clock Sunday morning, are you sure? But anyway, I'm very happy to see so many of you here, and I also like to welcome you to Estonia. And the second thing I wanted to say, I'm not really used to hearing so good words, especially in this hall. So thank you for this. So, dear Mr. President, members of the Assembly, it's really my great pleasure to welcome you here in Tallinn to celebrate with us the 20th anniversary of us joining NATO. Never alone again, and that was the slogan, and these are the 3 words that best describe Estonia's security approach for the past 30 years. When Estonia stated its wish to join NATO in the 1990s, there were many decision makers, both sides of the Atlantic, who were instantly opposed to the idea. Why include more members when NATO's role and purpose in the new peaceful world order are not even determined yet? And why do you need NATO? Because Russia does not pose a threat anymore. And what about Russia? Former NATO Secretary General Lord Robertson recalled in 2021 how he met with Putin after he became president, and Putin asked him, when is Moscow being invited to join NATO? When he heard that Russia has to apply to get into NATO, he said, well, we are not standing in line with a lot of countries that don't matter. Estonia was one of those countries, and look at us now. We have come a long way, and Russia, at the same time, seems to be moving backwards. Who can imagine these days that Putin once said that Russia is part of European culture, and it is hard for him to visualize NATO as an enemy. As we later witnessed, these were mere words. Times were very different then, and the hope and the desire to see democratic Russia blinded many, numbering a sense of reality in the free world. But it seems that we are keep making the same mistakes over and over again. A new Secretary General of NATO will be appointed this year, and many names have been floated around. Let's skip the names and focus on the arguments. One point that stands out: a Central or Northern Eastern European candidate could pose too great an escalation risk in relations with Russia. Come on, in this time, NATO itself has assessed that Russia is the biggest threat to our security. What more is there to escalate? I mean, really, what more is there to escalate? Why do we still worry about that? Isn't Russia's launching a genocidal war not enough already? Looking back, the mistake was treating Russia kindly after its defeat in Cold War. Western countries gave assistance, hoped Russia would develop into a democratic nation that upholds rule of law, international law, protection of human rights and freedoms. But in reality, as soon as they achieved more economic stability, partly with our help, they turned into revanchism. No wonder that, living next to the unpredictable neighbor, Estonia jumped at the chance to join all kinds of unions after regaining independence. Next week, we are celebrating the 20 years in NATO. NATO has made Estonia stronger, no doubt about that. But also our membership in NATO has reinforced the alliance, demonstrating how shared values can enhance collective security not only in Europe, but also Afghanistan, Libya, Iraq, and the Horn of Africa. According to the recently published Human Freedom Index by the Cato Institute, Estonia ranks 5th in terms of freedom in the world. We are not only the freest country among the so-called New Europe, but also among the top 3 freest countries in both the European Union and NATO. There's nothing more to prove this in this regard, but we cannot let our guard down. Now that Sweden and Finland have joined, there has been enthusiastic talk about Baltic Sea transforming into NATO's lake. It is a tremendous achievement and improves our security greatly. However, we must also be aware that it does not eliminate the challenges to our region. Russia and threat of Russia remains. Kaliningrad is still there, and so is the Baltic Fleet. The Russian threat is not only to the Nordic-Baltic region, but to Europe and transatlantic area in general. Therefore, we need to continue to emphasize the importance of defense, and the best way to do it is to invest into defense. Not only 2% of our economy, but at least 2.5%. Estonia is now spending more than 3.2% of our GDP in defense. Ladies and gentlemen, a few days after a NATO summit in Prague, during which Estonia was asked to join the alliance, former National Security Advisor to President Jimmy Carter, Mr. Brzezinski, said something at an event. He recalled watching a documentary about Stalin-era deportations. I saw the eyes of a child looking outside through a cattle wagon. I will never forget that look. Tomorrow in Estonia, we commemorate the 75th anniversary of the March deportation, honoring the victims. My own mother was among them, being just a 6-month-old baby at the time. My family was lucky and they returned, but many didn't. And today we are witnessing Ukrainian children being deported to Russia, and we have to do everything to stop it. To not experience such horrors ever again, we applied for NATO and European Union memberships as soon as possible, because never alone again. The odds were against us, but another horrifying event, 9/11, opened a window of opportunity for all of us. And fortunately, we were prepared for that. Russia and the United States sat at the same side of the table, and the question which minor country belongs to which organization did not seem to be relevant at that moment. Then everything changed again, or rather returned to its original state, because nothing in principle had changed. Russia wanting to be part of Europe, yes, maybe, but these were only words. Words seasoned with the veiled threats as usual. And last, I would like to cite Estonian then President Lennart Meri, who said in 1998 in a speech in Oxford, "We are regularly hearing the following: it cannot be done. You are indefensible. You are too close to Russia. Russia will object, and then what will become of Europe?" And he added, "I would counter by saying that it can be done, and I believe that it will happen. First, NATO has enlarged before and is enlarging now, so it follows that it will enlarge again in the future." As it turned out, the words applied to Estonia then, I believe that they still apply today, and will continue to do so in the future. NATO continues to become larger because there are still countries in Europe, like Ukraine, which fight for its freedom and stand up for democracy, rule of law, and above all, freedom. Our door must remain open because it makes us, as the alliance, stronger. Never alone again has been our guide, and it is what drives us to ensure that everything in our power is done to guarantee that Ukraine will also one day join NATO and never stand alone again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. Yesterday, during our dinner, I also mentioned the words of President Meri, "never alone again," exactly said 20 years ago when Estonia joined NATO. Now we can just repeat this, and I hope someday also Jehor can say "never alone again" when Ukraine will join NATO, and I hope also the EU. But we do have a lot of warnings, and we are sure that in a few years Russia might be willing to enable to test NATO's Article 5 commitments. I just want to inform you, Madam President, and our colleagues that today at 4:23 a.m. a Russian missile aimed at Ukraine flew over Polish territory, and it was reported by the operational command of the armed forces in Poland, and there was a violation of Polish airspace. So we are dealing with it almost every day. So just let me begin our discussion, and thank you for answering some questions. And we will start with Theo Frenken, Vice President of NATO PA.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Prime Minister, for your speech so early in the morning. Next week we are celebrating 20 years of Estonia membership within our alliance. And I think it was a very huge success to have that enlargement 20 years ago with a lot of countries. It was the biggest enlargement of NATO in our history, and I think it was a very positive step. Your candidates for the NATO Secretary Generalship, I understand. I don't know it's true. Maybe you can confirm, maybe you don't confirm. But there's some other candidates I read in the newspapers. I have two questions because, of course, it's a crucial position in these difficult times. And we have a Norwegian that is doing a really great job. So I think that's big shoes to fill in. I have two questions. First of all, when you're saying that the GDP, 2%, has to go to 2.5%, I'm from Belgium, and we're not the best pupil in the class. We're not at 2%, not even close. My question is, what would you do as a Secretary General to stimulate the countries that not obtaining the 2%? What would be your approach to be clear? And because putting it on 2.5%, while a lot of countries are not even at 2%, it's very ambitious, but how would you do that? I think that only talking and asking is not really sufficient. My second point is that, of course, you focused on Ukraine, of course, but in NATO policy, we're also talking about 360 degrees approach, and I think it's very important to talk about the global south, about the south, the Middle East. There's a big conflict going on between Israel and Hamas. I'm very worried, we're with the alliance and also with the parliament, we're very worried about the position of Iran. Iran in the whole geopolitical hemisphere. So my question to you is, what would be your stance towards the Ayatollah regime in Tehran? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes. A lot of points here. First, starting, I'm not a candidate because I was never considered, and this is the end of it. Then, when it comes to the 2%, I must say that we have been investing more than 2% over 10 years now, and we are doing 3.2% of our GDP now. And because actually there was this defense investment pledge that everybody agreed to in 2014. So, of course, it's not obligatory at that time. But then when the war started, I thought that now everybody will invest and will boost their defense expenditure because, there's a hot war going on. In 1988, all of the NATO's countries spent more than 2% of their GDP on defense, some even 6%. And why? Because the threat was real. Cold War was going on. Now we have a hot war going on in Europe, and still some countries in Europe think that, we don't really have to invest in defense. Now, what is interesting, we have the European Parliament elections coming up, and there was a poll which showed what is the main topic in different countries. And what was interesting about this, security and defense was the main issue in 3 countries. And by the way, they are not 3 Baltic countries, but they are Denmark, Poland and Estonia. And why? Why Denmark? Because the Prime Minister of Denmark talks about this threat. As Plato said years ago, said that the role of the government is also to educate people. And the problem with spending on defense is that when you have a peacetime and when you have very nice neighbors like some of you have and we don't have, then as a prime minister, there's so many things I can spend the taxpayers' money on because, education, social affairs, and when you actually need the defense, then it's already too late. Again, I bring you example from 1933 from Estonia. In 1933, our defense expenditure here was record low because it was peacetime and we were a neutral country. Of course, a neutral country does not hurt anybody. What happened was that in 1938, when the realization came that, oh my God, the war is going to start, the defense expenditure was increased by 100%, but it was too late. It was too late because you couldn't fulfill the procurements because everybody was doing that. And this is what I'm trying to tell to other leaders in Europe as well, and some are saying that it's changing. For example, the Belgian Prime Minister said that now people are getting it, that it might be necessary. Again, when I talk to people in different countries, NATO countries, but also outside. For example, I was in Austria, and they were like, oh, you are at the front lines of this war. It's like, no, I mean, look at the map. You are much closer to the war than we are, actually. And yeah, but we don't feel the threat here. Yes, but you are closer to the war. And if you read history, if you look at the documentaries about the Second World War, there were 2, or actually 3 lessons. One lesson was that Europe is a very small continent. When something happens, then it soon will be all over Europe. Nobody is left untouched. And second, when aggression pays off somewhere, it serves as an invitation to use it elsewhere. If you just remember, when Nazis were gaining ground, Japanese went to their neighbors' territories because, okay, this is now open, so, we grab also the things that we have appetite for. And the third was that American isolationism didn't really work, and it ended up also costing United States more than it would have if we would have been together from the start, and from the start pushing the aggression back. Now, the second question regarding the 360 degrees approach, NATO has kept this approach all the time, and again, I'm actually tying these things together. Iran, North Korea, also China, they are very carefully looking how this all plays out. And we already see, the conventional war that is going on, but we already see the shadow war that is going on in different spheres, be it in cyberspace. The actors are the same, then be it in space, and information war as well that is going on. So I'm very worried, and this is all related. They have tied, or they are backing each other regarding Russia's actions here. And if the response is not strong enough, I think we're going to see more of wars all across the world. And Iran, in the Middle East, what we have right now, yes, they are not that public about this, but we see that they are, benefiting from this, and actually, in the shadows, trying to also fuel these kind of wars and conflicts because it's to their benefit. So I think it is a question of the countries that share the same values, like we are in NATO or European Union, to stick together because the other actors are fighting really against us here. I hope I answered now everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. I just want to mention that we have already 7 speakers, and we have 20 minutes. So,
so I have to be
ask you for short comments and for short questions. Now we start with Anne Jeanette from France. The floor is from Canada. You are the first, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for being here this morning, Prime Minister. It's wonderful to hear your speech, and thank you for the extraordinary contribution Estonia is making to NATO. Estonia is also known for being leaders in cybersecurity and in tackling disinformation. And I'll tell you, we have a lot of spirited discussions at our NATO PA assembly meetings around cybersecurity, around disinformation, because we know it is weakening our democracies. So what advice would you have for other NATO countries who are trying to step up our game in both of these areas?
Thank you. Very good question. First is to invest in cybersecurity and foundations of your digital infrastructure. In 2007, we had big attacks, but this is nothing compared to the attacks that we see now every day. But they don't go through because we have invested a lot in the infrastructure and the foundation of our digital infrastructure. But what I recommend to everybody is first to invest there in the cybersecurity, because and then second is to also cooperate with the private sector so that these we could educate them also in some aspects, because years ago some hospitals, for example, only had to worry, their security risk was that some drug addict is coming and stealing morphine. Now the security risk is that they could be cyber attacked and there could be civilian casualties because these attacks go through. So what we have done, we have the State Information Agency that also does audits. Here are your gaps, patch those for the private companies, because it's all very, very interlinked. The third thing that I would recommend is to make all the cyber attacks public. And also advise this for the private companies, because if you are cyber attacked, then the countries, the governments, or the companies are ashamed that it went through. They don't really want to talk about this, but if you don't talk about this, then others can't prepare. And I always say the bad guys share information, the good guys should as well. So I think these are the basic things. And by the way, we were chairing the United Nations Security Council, not chairing, but we were part of the United Nations Security Council some years ago, and I was chairing the first ever meeting on cyber security there. And what was interesting was that there were two players, and you can guess who they were, who said that international law should not really apply in cyberspace. You can just guess who those two members were who didn't want this to be applied, international law as such. Thank you.
Okay, now Anne Jeanette from France. The floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Madam Prime Minister. I'll be speaking in French, if I may. Channel number 1 for English. Thank you very much, President. Thank you, Madam Prime Minister, for being here early morning on a Sunday and give us a bit of your time. First of all, allow me to thank your country, Estonia, for the wonderful cooperation my country and your country have. I met with the French commander of the Lynx force here, and allow me to thank you for our forces as well. I'd like to come back to what two heads of states said recently and have your take on it, Madam. First of all, French President Emmanuel Macron, who said about 2 weeks ago that support in Ukraine should have no limits and nothing should be excluded. What is your reaction to that? And the second one, who's not yet a head of state, it's the candidate, Donald Trump, who gave a lecture to a number of countries of Europe saying, we will not defend you if you do not put more money on the table. How would you react to these two comments by the two people?
I agree with President Macron that we shouldn't rule anything out, because, Russia, or we have been guessing so long what Russia is doing next. Let them guess what we are doing next, and not be so. We need some kind of, strategic ambiguity around our actions as well. Of course, there was a lot of fuss around, the proposals, but I think it's important right now that we focus on what we do, not on what we don't do, because when we just say that, okay, we are not doing that or we are not doing that, who's taking notes is Russia. It's like, okay, they're not doing that, so we can push even further. So I think we need that approach, and it is true. I think very many have understood in Europe is that when Ukraine falls, the European security architecture is really under threat, and it is actually wiser and cheaper for us to help Ukraine to defend and push Russia back than to expect this war to expand. Now, the second question regarding President Trump, of course, we have to work with every president that our allies choose for themselves. It's not up to us to make that choice. But what he was bringing to the table last time, and is actually saying that, you know, Europe should do more, and this is the 2%, what everybody should do, and this I think we should do despite who is the president of the United States. This is Europe, and that's why I've advocated that at least 2%, but actually now when we have a hot war going on in Europe, then we should do much, much more. And of course it goes hand in hand with the boosting of the defense industry. And I've met a lot of representatives from the defense industry who you know, say, we hear a lot of slogans by the countries, we don't see orders. So we have to actually make this really happen, and that's why I've made many proposals how we can, you know, move on. By the way, also in Estonia we have a very vibrant tech sector, so we brought them around the table thinking, you know, how to make the innovation in defense industry as well, because the old defense industry is very, very slow, and I think there's a lot of room. But the problem is funding. Most of the funds are close to defense. Because the private funds as well as European Investment Bank can't invest in lethal ammunition or lethal equipment, and it shouldn't be so. We have crises now, and we have to you know, open those funds so that we could all do more and not be worried who is going to be president in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Prime Minister. And now we'll collect some questions. Zaida Cantera from Spain, Agnes Vadai, and Matej Tonin from Slovenia. Please.
Thank you very much.
I don't understand.
Thank you very much, Madam Prime Minister. I would like to thank you for the support that you have, the nice welcome that you have given to Spain, and thank you also for the Estonian delegation for this wonderful welcome that you have given us. Yesterday, someone reminded us that we are politicians, and as politicians, we need to listen to our population. I know that one of the things that Spanish people worry about is the tiredness, the fatigue in relation to the war in Ukraine, and the fact that it could lead to new wars. But I want to focus on the question of misinformation. As politicians, in my case and in the case of my colleague here, who is from the opposition, we want to remind our people that it is important to support the NATO, that it is important to support Ukraine. But there is psychological warfare going on as well. And we believe that the NATO is not doing enough in a coordinated manner in order to fight against the propaganda that is happening in all of our countries, which Russia is making use of, and sometimes also playing along with China. So I worry about the people who are living further away from the war, about the psychological element. The support that we need to justify to politicians is only 2%, but we need to do more as politicians to also fight against the psychological warfare as NATO. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Agnes Vadai from Hungary.
Thank you very much, Madam Prime Minister, I'm Agnes Svadai from Democratic Coalition Party in Hungary. I have 3 short questions. The first is, what is your message to those Central and Eastern European political leaders who, even these days, seem to feel themselves closer to Moscow than Brussels? The second question, what is your opinion on utilizing frozen Russian assets in Europe to use towards the reconstruction of Ukraine? And my third question, would Estonia support setting up a special international court, criminal court, like, for example, in the case of ex-Yugoslavia, which would prosecute all those who committed war crimes and crimes against humanity on the territory of Ukraine during the Russian aggressions against the country? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Agnes. And now I ask Matej Tonin from Slovenia, please.
Prime Minister, you are a bright example that even a small country can do a lot for Ukraine, and I would like to congratulate you for everything what you did. You were talking about defense spending. Unfortunately, Slovenia is among countries who are not spending enough, and you and Mr. Trump are right that we have to do our share. That's our duty, and I say that defense spending is the easiest part because it's a think of a political will. If we want, we can spend more. But I see that we have bigger problem with the human resources, with the personnel in the military forces, at least we in Slovenia. And that's why I'm interested, what is the reaction of Estonian society? Are more people, more citizens willing to serve in the armed forces? And how are people reacting, for example, to the Estonian Defense League? Do you have more or less citizens willing to serve?
Okay.
Thank you. You can answer the questions,
okay.
please.
Okay. Yes, politicians, and we need to listen to our population, the psychological warfare. This is true. China is very good in technology, but not very good in social sciences. Russia is the opposite. They are not very good in technology, but they are super good in social sciences. Super good in pouring the fuels into the fires that are already existing within our societies. You know, all the, clashes in political life as well. So disinformation, it is spreading very much, and I also see that we here are more prepared for this, to recognize, our people are more prepared for this, to recognize the misinformation than, for example, in countries that are not used to this. What we try to do is to make all these things public, to educate our people. In the schools, we have the media literacy classes, so that children would be critical media consumers, that what to believe and what not to believe, and as narratives, what Russia is doing also. Staging these kind of elections that they call elections. Why do they do this? Nobody believes. They don't believe these are elections, actually. And I refuse to call them elections. I say that it's more like a special nomination operation that they did. But why they are doing this is to undermine our democracies, our elections, saying that, you have elections, we have elections, it's all the same. And what it does is making, people really confused, and they don't know what to trust anymore, what to understand, and what is the truth. Truth is a very, very firm line in democracy, but it's very hard. I mean, again, after the Second World War, it was Winston Churchill who said that, lies half away across the world before the truth gets its pants on. And now we are in an information area. It's absolutely impossible to keep this all together. But I think the key is actually to educate people what they can trust, what channels they can trust, and what we have, like in the schools, we have the 8 elements that you have to check when you read or share something. And by the way, the young people are not the biggest problem. The old ones are, because those who haven't really, have lived during the times when it was in the news, it must be truth. But now they don't separate, what they read in Facebook, where it comes from, is it a correct channel or not? So this is definitely, and again, I think what is important for us to share the experiences and the tools that we use in different countries and learn from each other what we can do in other parts. Because again, I understand Spain is far away, and for your people, it maybe you haven't been touched by wars, and so it's like, oh, just settle down and why don't you just agree and stop this war? What I want to emphasize is that I don't know one single person in Ukraine or in Estonia who is for war. Everybody is for peace. But for a small country like Estonia, war always means destruction, atrocities, human suffering. For a big country, it also might mean glory. And that is the problem. You are here, I don't know if you have time to visit, just if you go down the hill, there's a Museum of Freedom. And there you can see the cattle wagons that, for example, my mother was deported to Siberia. And these are the things, these people are still alive. So, and these deportations were 49. It was a peacetime. I mean, but there's a difference between peace and peace. I mean, majority in the European, the side of the Iron Curtain, you had, prosperity, building up your countries after the Second World War, whereas we had also peace here. But that peace meant mass deportations, that meant erasure of our culture and language, or actually trying to erase. We are resilient. But and killing our elite completely. So that was peace. That's why we are fighting so hard for this. Sorry to be so long. So the question, the leaders who seem to be closer to Moscow, what is interesting is that I see totally 2 different pictures. One is what I see in the media, and the other thing that I see inside the rooms where we actually discuss these things. And these same leaders who are like friends with Russia, friends I would say in quotation marks, they are very much preparing for Russia's aggression. So I mean, their actions are like, they don't believe Russia is a friend. So I have this kind of conflict in my head when I see this all the time. Now, 2 questions, frozen assets and international tribunal. Frozen assets, we have been pushing this for a very long time. So we have also drafted a law to use those frozen assets. And I would explain this in a very, very simple way. I'm a lawyer by profession, so I send it back 3 times. Is it bulletproof? Well, it's never bulletproof because, lawyers can always contest anything. But we try to make it as bulletproof as possible. So how does it work? In Hague, you have the registry of war damages. So all the damages that Russia is causing to Ukraine, they are registering also what it costs. So we know the claim that Ukraine has towards Russia to repair those damages. Now, we have the frozen assets, so we know what they cost. So Russia has a legitimate claim towards us regarding getting those assets back or the value of those assets. So we make a settlement of those 2 claims and say that we give those assets or proceeds of those assets to Ukraine. And after, Russia has settled all those damages that they have caused to Ukraine, I mean, Ukraine can give the leftovers back, which I doubt that there are. So basically, it is a rule of law thing. We recognize it's not confiscating the assets. It's recognizing, yes, we have them. We know the value. You have a claim towards us, but Ukraine has a claim towards you, and we make the settlement. So I think, we have to think, you can't imagine I don't know, 100 years that we will just lift the sanctions one day, say that, oh, nothing happened, nothing to see here. What comes to the International Tribunal, then I've been reading a lot about this. So what we have to really distinguish is the war crimes, the crimes that are committed by the soldiers on the ground in Ukraine, and the crime of aggression. What is a leadership crime? So somebody decides to attack another country. Without that leadership crime, you wouldn't have any war crimes either. So we have to actually have a tribunal for the leadership crime so that, to prevent these things happening in the future. Again, I mean, reading regarding those tribunals, I think there's a gap in our international law, and every such big crisis is also a source for or opportunity window to draft or develop international law further. After the Second World War, the United Nations was established, and the idea was very good that there wouldn't be any wars in the world. But there's lacking an element of sanctions. What happens if somebody attacks a sovereignty of another country? So there has to be clear connection there. And by the way, the Nuremberg Tribunal, it was discussed already in 1942. Before the war was far from over, how to put up this tribunal. So we really have to work with this, because I think, again, we want peace, we want sustainable peace, and the element of this is accountability. There was Nuremberg Tribunal, and one of the effects of the Nuremberg Tribunal was that the German people got to know about the crimes committed by the Nazis. There was never a Moscow Tribunal. And the Russian people don't know about the crimes committed in Poland, in Ukraine, in the Baltic countries. They don't know, and they don't know now. So there has to be accountability for those crimes. By the way, if you want to understand this or Russia better, then I really recommend one book, which is Orlando Figes, The Story of Russia. If you don't have time to read the whole book, just read the last chapter, which is about this, how Orlando Figes, Story of Russia. Very good. He has other good books as well, but this is a very good one, especially the last chapter, to understand how we are constantly getting Russia wrong. Defense spending. Defense League and how the army. How we convince people. My husband joined the Defense League. It's a voluntary organization after the war started, and they are the CEOs of companies. So a group of them, a lot of people joined Defense League. Because they were discussing amongst themselves that, if something happens, first of all, you have to know what you have to do. And the second is that you can't really imagine that you would be in a nice villa in Spain watching the news how your country is being destroyed. So you really want to defend the country. We have a reserve army, so we have conscription, and all those who go through conscription, then they are later on in reserve army, and then we gather them for exercises all the time. And this is a very, very good. The will to defend is very high, and how we try to do this already in schools so that, you know, people who graduate from the gymnasium, then they can go together to conscription and go through this training, military training together. So you go with your friends and you get all the necessary skills to do that. It is, of course, how we make it. I think Russia is doing a lot for us so that people understand why this is really necessary. So, but I think it works. So they are not all professionals. Of course, we have those who get salary for, or are the soldiers. I mean, the core of the military, but there's also the reserve army, which are regular people, and to keep it all together, it's trainings. Okay.
Madam Prime Minister, we have the last 2 questions, and please keep it short. It's Thomas from Slovakia and Nikolaos from Greece.
Right here.
Yes.
Madam Prime Minister, right here. Thanks for your remarks, and also, of course, a big thanks to you and the Estonian delegation for hosting us in this beautiful country. We're meeting here as members of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, but of course, things that happen outside NATO deeply affect what we do as NATO. You will have just attended the European Council Thursday and Friday, I believe, in Brussels. Are you satisfied with the measures there taken to strengthen the European defense industry? And if not, can you offer us any ideas on what else to do within NATO and also within the European Union to further boost our defense industry so that we can catch up to the Russian rates of production? Thank you.
Nikolaos, please.
Yes. Thank you, Madam President, for your excellent hospitality and sharing your very interesting views with us. My question is quite relevant with that of a Slovak colleague. Everybody agrees that Europe needs to spend more on defense. Everybody agrees that this will create a boost for the European defense industry, and now is the best time to do it. However, defense spending tends to increase debt. Now, as a European leader, as a diligent NATO spender, please give us your opinion. How would you balance those 2 elements? How do you find a common ground? Would you, for example, consider some easing of the strict fiscal rules in the European Union? Our Prime Minister proposed 2 days ago, you heard him probably, the idea of creating a Eurobond for defense. Would you go about changing the rules of the European Investment Bank? How would you go about tackling this sensitive issue with debt pressure because of defense expenditure that is necessary right now? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, very connected question. So, of course, the issue is the funding. In Estonia here, we have increased taxes, and I can tell you it's not popular, but I don't have a choice because, we have to spend more and more on defense because, like I say, our historical experience is this, and we have to explain this to people that we ask you a bigger contribution. And I can tell you, it's very hard. It's very hard. But, I sometimes think that, if we manage to, by increasing our defense expenditure, by increasing our defense, if we manage to deter Russia from attacking us, then people would say it's money well spent. But if not, and bombs are flying here, then I think our people will say, maybe we should have, agreed to pay 10 euros per month more so that we wouldn't have the war here. this is not what all political leaders are up to, because this is the hardest you can do. What comes to well, actually, I will come back to the funding and also reply. So one question is the funding, how we can do that, and the other question is also how we can, use these times for innovation, really, because every war has brought also innovation to the civil society via the defense industry, and as we have most startups per capita here, tech companies, very vibrant tech sector. So we invited them to think along the lines, and they have many super ideas, and they even cooperate with the Ukrainians so that, all the drones and the technology that they can produce really fast. They can also test in real combat in Ukraine, not in some training grounds, but real combat. So these guys are making the developments very fast. The main question that they have is funding. The startups are very used to raising capital because this is what they do for their ideas, but they say for defense, everything is closed. So together with 14 leaders in European Union, I sent the letter to the European Investment Bank that take down this rule that you can't use the funds for defense, because we have the crisis now and we have to, really open up the funds. So if they do it, then maybe the private funds will do it as well, because they see the possibilities there. Now, what comes to the funding, then of course on the state side, and I propose the Eurobonds idea, and I know that there are countries who are very much against this, but I'm happy to see that actually even those countries that are the usual suspects are thinking along the lines. Okay, if that doesn't fly, then come up with some other things, because the crisis is now. What comes to the strict fiscal rules, then this idea has been floating around, but it's still debt. It's still debt. So of course, with the defense spending, it's easier, because you can say that in NATO we have very strict rules what you can put into the defense spending. So it can't go any wider, but it's still debt, and countries have still problems with the debt. So first, open the funds, then second, try to think how we can raise capital and use also the funds what we already have. But it's a problem. I agree.
Thank you, Madam Prime Minister, for being with us this morning and for this extremely insightful exchange. And most importantly, thank you for your leadership here in Estonia and here in the Eastern flank.